Last year, one of the best books that I read was called Daring Greatly. It's just an excellent book by Brené Brown. I read and listen to books. I do a lot of driving, so I listen to books as well as I read them. And so I read this book all the way through cover to cover, and then I listened to the book 2 times as well. I listened to it first, then read it, and then listened to it again. And it's probably going to be one of the books I listen to or read once a year. And I try to read, 15, 20 books a year. That's kind of my goal. I don't know what you read or whatever, but that's just kind of where I like to be. And this was just really good. It spoke so deeply to different parts of life. And one of the stories that she shared was about a company that kept track of its employees in a different kind of a way. And maybe you faced something like this. They kept track of the high-performing employees and then the low-performing employees. Yeah, they had 2 lists. In the boss's office, they had a whiteboard, and then on the one side were the high-performing employees, and they would have their names on there listed, the top 5 or whatever that were in the high-performing. And then on the other side, it was like a shame list. These are the ones you should be ashamed of yourself, and they were on that side of the pile. And everybody knew when they walked in, you did not want to be on the shame board, right? And you're underperforming, you're not doing so well, you want to be on the top performing side. And the goal was that if you ended up on the shame side, on the underperforming side, you would essentially get to a point where you said, you know what, I need to do something, and you'd improve and work at being better so that you can be on the high performing side, or at least get off of the shame board. Or you'd just quit. You say, I can't do it, I just quit, I'm done. And so you had the 2 elements going on. And one person who was just a top-performing employee, she had worked there for several years, and she recounts how she was on the top-performing board for literally years. She was just a star employee, and then some circumstances happened in her life, and she went from being the star employee to becoming one that ended up on the shame list. So you have this issue then in your heart. What do you do with that when you go from being a top performer to being someone that everybody's saying, what's wrong with them? Well, it was only, if I remember correctly in the story, it was only a few weeks later that she just got so discouraged and despondent, and she ended up just saying, I'm done. She quit, left, and went to another place and started her career over at another place. And interestingly enough, as she did that, she became successful again in a totally different culture. Now, here's the reality. I know that maybe you don't work at a place like that. Maybe you do. I don't know. But for most of us, you've had those kinds of experiences where you have the people that look at you and you're either on the top performer board or you're on the shame board. It could be that the way you were raised, your parents had you on the top performing board or on the shame board. You're not so good as your brother or your sister. If you were better, you could be on the top performing board kind of a thing. Or you have that in your neighborhood. Your house is okay, but mine's so much better. And you're the low performing, I'm the high performing. And you have these kinds of things that happen in our life. And the question that I'm really wanting to chase is, which one is healthy? Like, is it healthy to have this kind of a culture of shame versus high performance and pushing people in this kind of way? Because I see this happening in the church too. In church culture, there's a high shame culture. If you don't do exactly what you're supposed to do, and you didn't go to church a certain amount of times, and you didn't do this a certain amount of times, and you didn't give this, and you didn't volunteer for, and you have these kind of quotas that if you didn't meet the quotas and hit the checklist just right, you end up on the shame board. Well, at least you showed up today, kind of thing. Is that what God would want? So, the missing piece, I would say, in most relationships, that really is the difference between a healthy relationship and an unhealthy relationship, is found right here. Biblical research, which I take as the priority for the research that I do, but biblical research as well as best business practices, because I do reading in both sides of things, best business practices and biblical research, they point in the same direction, and Paul actually shares with the church in Thessalonica the distinction that he wants for us to understand. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, and you see this on your card, in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 11, on the top of the card, it says, "Therefore, encourage one another and build one another up." Encourage one another and build one another up. When you look at that one verse, does it give room for a shame board versus a high-performing board? When you look at your name on a shame board, is there anything encouraging about that? That's easy, right? Well, honey, you were great last week, but this week you're on the shame board. Maybe next week you can do better, right? But sometimes we act that way. And for some of us, we're raised that way. Here Paul says, encourage one another, build one another up. And here's the reality. Paul saw encouragement up front and in person. And I believe that more people, this is so important, listen to this, I believe more people walk away from God because of discouragement than any other reason. And we're living in a time where people are walking away from God at a faster rate than we've ever seen in our lifetime. But I truly believe, as I talk to people more and more about this, the reason I believe most people are walking away from God comes back to discouragement. And I would say this, in addition to that, most people walk away from relationships. They disengage to whatever level because of discouragement. And I want to approach this morning and talk about this from the perspective of Barnabas. Barnabas is this guy in the New Testament. If you're not familiar with him, let me give you some background, and I just want to go through his life and show you the things that we see in the book of Acts, because he's not really talked about anywhere else. But in the book of Acts, you see Barnabas talked about in Acts chapter 4, if you want to turn there with me in your Bible. Acts chapter 4, you see the first time that he's mentioned. And this is in verse 36. It says, "Thus Joseph, who was also called by the apostles Barnabas." So his name is Joseph, but the people around him, they called him Barnabas, which is interesting because the next phrase says, which means he's the son of encouragement. So his kind of reputation is all about encouragement. And you can see that in his life. It's interesting because I look at that, and if we were to change each other's names in church, what would you get your name changed to? Oh, grumpy one. Oh, overexcited one. You know, it could just be having a little bit of fun there, but think about Barnabas. Going from Joseph to that guy is the encourager guy. He lives to encourage people, and you can see in his life. And here's what he did in verse 37. He said he's a Levite, native of Cyprus. He says he sold a field that belonged to him and brought the money and laid it at the apostles' feet. So here's what he does. He is very generous and kind, and he's empathetic. He sees the needs of others. And during that season of life there in that culture, the people that called themselves Christians, they were persecuted in a way that they were being killed and tortured for their faith. And so they would be losing their jobs and losing their reputation, losing different things, and they would have very serious needs to be cared for. And so Barnabas, as well as some others, took some land. They would sell everything or sell what they had, and then they would come and bring it to the apostles and say, hey, listen, if you know there's some needs, just take care of it. And so you see that right away, that he is an encourager in the way that he handles his finances. He is just a very generous person altogether. Then you go through and you see Barnabas in different perspectives as he works with different people. Acts chapter 9. Now I just want to walk through his life with you and see what this guy really was all about. Acts chapter 9. In verse 26, in Acts chapter 9, verse 26, it says, and when he had come to Jerusalem, he had attempted to join the disciples. Now, who's the he? It's not Barnabas. It's this guy named Saul. A little bit of background. We're fast forwarding from the point where he's giving money away, Barnabas is. We're fast forwarding through, and we see that things are happening with the church. The church is growing. People are coming to follow Jesus. And there's thousands upon thousands upon thousands. And then this one guy, Saul, who hates Christians and wants all the Christians dead, does all he can to persecute the Christians. He comes to faith in Jesus. He has a total 180 turnaround where he's hating to actually following completely. And so as he does, could you imagine this? This is the guy that's putting people in jail, and he's the guy that people would attribute for Stephen, the one follower of Jesus, being stoned to death. And so here, Saul wants to be with other followers of Christ. Listen, time out. If Saul, the persecutor of Christians, who wanted Christians to be dead, comes to the doors of the church, how would you respond? What would you say to Roger? Let him in? Don't let him in. Should we take a poll? Right? I mean, honestly, we'd all be like, yeah, listen, there's a church down the road you can go to, but don't go here. I don't know how we'd handle that, but that's really what's going on. So it says, when Paul, had come to Jerusalem, he attempted to join the disciples, and they were all afraid of him, for they did not believe that he was a disciple. While he said, hey, I'm a disciple, I'm a follower of Jesus now, they didn't believe it. Verse 27, here's Barnabas. But Barnabas took him and brought him to the apostles and declared to them how on the road he had seen the Lord, who spoke to him, and how at Damascus he had preached boldly in the name of Jesus. So Barnabas steps in. You remember last month, the healthy habit that we talked about last month is to be the gift, right? To greet and to introduce and invite people in and introduce them to one another. Here's what Barnabas does. Barnabas cares so much, he's so others-focused that he's seen Saul at the time, and later on he gets changed to Paul, but he sees Saul, and he sees what he's done. He goes from being a hater of and wanting to kill Christians to someone who's following Jesus. And he gets to this point where he's wanting to be with other followers, and he comes in and he realizes, hey, Paul, you're not getting in here. So I'll introduce you. I'll put my name on the line for you. He's being others focused. So he introduces him, he brings them into the conversation with the others, and Paul then goes from being an outsider to an insider. Isn't it awful to be an outsider? And that's exactly what Barnabas was doing. I'm not leaving you out here. You need to be an insider. I see where you're heading. And so that's where Barnabas is. He's just caring for him in a real way. Then you go down to chapter 11. In chapter 11, verse 25, it says, and before this, you see Barnabas is in this, verse 22, it says, the report came to the ears of the church in Jerusalem, and they sent Barnabas to Antioch. So Barnabas goes to Antioch, and he's there, and he's sharing the good news of Jesus Christ with those in Antioch. And while he's there, people are just coming to follow Jesus, and it's as if he needs some help. So what does he do? He goes and gets Saul, and this is verse 25. It says, so Barnabas went to Tarsus to look for Saul. So he goes to Tarsus. He says, hey, listen, I need to get Saul on board. And so he goes and finds Saul, and he brings him in, and when he found him, he brought him to Antioch. For a whole year, they met with the church and taught a great many people. So he takes Saul from being the outsider to an insider, and then later on, he joins up he has Saul join up, or Paul join up with him, and they're doing mission together, doing ministry together. How awesome is this? So then they're going from city to city, and they travel abroad. They do these missions kind of trips, if you will, and sharing with other people what's going on in their lives. And as they do, chapter 13, verse 2, they send them out. The church sends them out to different places, and it says they sent out Barnabas and Saul for the work which they've been called to. And so they see this happening. They just keep on serving and keep on working together, and there's amazing things happening. This all starts with a little bit of encouragement. Something interesting happens. As this happens in most relationships, they get into an argument. Chapter 15 is fascinating because tucked into here is a time where this one guy, John Mark, who's a young guy, he was cousin of Barnabas, and John Mark was with them, helping them to go on these missions, and usually they would have some different people that would help to carry the load in different ways. And so here, John Mark abandons and kind of leaves, and they get to the end of Acts chapter 15, verse 39, and here's the whole context then. He says, and after some days, Paul said to Barnabas, let us return and visit the brothers in every city where we proclaim the word of the Lord and see how they are. Great idea, right? Hey, let's get up, let's go, let's travel, let's see what's going on with the cities we were at. This will be great. I'd love to encourage them. I'd love to teach them some more things and just catch up. It'll be a good time. Verse 37, now Barnabas wanted to take with them John, called Mark. But, verse 38, Paul thought best not to take with them one who had withdrawn from them in Pamphylia and had not gone with them to the work. Basically, John Mark deserted them. He left. He was done. He had gone as far as he could, and he's like, this is too much for me. I'm not doing this. Maybe he was scared, or I don't know what it's. There's no context except that he just deserted them. So Barnabas is saying, hey, let's bring him along because we need to keep on encouraging him, keep on growing him. And Paul's saying, no, that's not happening. We're done with him. Close the door. He's out. He's gone. He deserted us once. I'm not going to let it happen again. They have this big old argument. And then at the end of this is, in verse 39, and there arose a sharp disagreement so that they separated from each other. Barnabas took Mark with him and sailed away to Cyprus. But Paul chose Silas and departed, having been commended by the brothers to the grace of the Lord. And he went through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the churches. And so we see them separate and go in different directions. Why is this important? Because the fascinating thing is we see Paul's life displayed for us as he writes about it through the rest of Acts, and he writes letters back to the church, so we know all about Paul. We know very little about Barnabas, except that John Mark, the one he took with him, Paul writes about in one of his letters later on. Paul says about John Mark, as Paul is nearing going through a hard time, nearing the end of his ministry, and he says to him, send John Mark to me because he is profitable to me. So John Mark goes from being on the bad list with Paul to being someone who's basically a top performer, someone who he wants to be there with him. How does that happen? What's awesome is Barnabas is at the center of all of this. And I would suggest that while we look at all that Paul did, and then John Mark, note what he did, he wrote the Gospel of Mark. So there's some significance with both of these people, that underneath or behind the scenes with both of these people is the same person, Barnabas. That God was using Barnabas in such a way to be an encouragement with John Mark and with the Apostle Paul. Time out. What if Barnabas did not introduce Paul to the disciples? The outcome would be totally different. What if Barnabas gave up on John Mark? The outcome, you suspect that it'd be totally different. And that's my point, really, of all of this. You find this encourager. He's known for this. He's not the guy that's in front. He's the guy that just keeps on pushing you along and encouraging you. Keep getting in the game. Keep staying where you should be staying. And keep going. And he keeps encouraging and keeps on plodding along there. And here's my agenda, if you will, of this message, is to enlist all of us in this whole ministry of encouraging one another. The missing piece in all of our relationships often is that point of encouragement. The reason our relationships at home aren't that great is because of encouragement, from my perspective. We grow discouraged, we disengage, and if we were to turn anything around, it comes back to this one key theme of encouragement. That we're giving borrowed courage, we're saying things, we're doing things that are encouraging the people around us. And my suggestion would be to take that shame board and burn it. I don't see the shame board as biblical, even. So, how do you do this? Putting the missing piece of encouragement back into our relationships. You see, this happens great when we're dating or when we have a new relationship. We are like, hey, this is great. But then when you find some things that irritate you about the other person, encouragement doesn't happen so freely. And so my thought is, hey, let me push you back into the game by encouraging one another. So here's what we do. One, we look for ways to give others the courage and strength they need to get through the day. Is anybody having a rough time in life? Anybody? Just a few? Most of us, probably. Rough week, rough day, hard season. You're like, life's just hard. As we go through life, we all go through hard seasons, hard times, and some of us just have a hard life. One of the greatest things we can do is encourage one another. To give them the courage, the strength to get through, to get up and do another day. That you're just looking for ways to say, hey, I just want to pour some encouragement into your life. Not in a way that's lying to them. Like to say to me, hey, man, your hair looks great today. Right? That's not encouragement. That's lying to me. My hair can never look great. I don't have enough hair to look great. You follow me, right? That's my point, is flattery will get you nowhere. That's just lying. But when you look at the reality of what a person's all about, encouragement is speaking the truth into the life and finding those things to be able to pour out encouragement, courage and strength into them. How do you do this? You've got to be others focused. You have to get your focus off of yourself. And you look and you say, okay, I see where you're at, and I just want to figure out a way to encourage you. So you get to be an others focused. It requires humility, where you're putting others before you. The self-centered person, they're not interested in putting others before themselves. They are the chief, they're the end of the day, like they're everything, and there's no reason to encourage anybody else, because I need encouragement, by the way. The greatest way out of that is to begin looking at other people and start encouraging them. It requires humility, where you put others before you. The last thing I'll say, it requires movement. It requires movement. And it's that you're looking at a person where they are, and you're saying they need encouragement, and so I'm going to move from where I am to where they are. I'm going to say a kind word, say an encouraging word. I'm going to give them something that's encouraging, whatever it might be. And so you're moving in a direction that is encouraging to them. It requires movement. You can't just sit still and hope that encouragement happens. It doesn't happen on its own. It takes movement. And I'll say this, encouragement matures relationships. It matures relationships. Because encouragement does this, it gives clarity on what they're doing right. It gives clarity on what you like. In my relationship with my wife, if she comes up to me, in our home, not church, if she comes up to me and she rubs my back a little bit, just in a nice, kind of a way, she's allowed to, she's my wife. So she comes up and rubs my back a little bit. If I say nothing, what does she do? Eventually she'll stop. Because here, like, we all play these games in our mind, don't we? I wonder if he likes what I'm doing. Am I annoying him? Am I bothering him? I thought he liked it, but he's not saying anything. And you have these mind games that kind of go on inside of us internally, and then before long you're like, and you get busy doing something else. On the flip side, if I respond to that and I say, oh, that feels great. Or I'll do this. Keep going a little bit to the left, a little bit left. I got an issue spot right over to the left a little bit. Okay, some of you are there. You understand this, right? What you're simply doing is you're communicating and encouraging, and you're giving place for that person to be. And you're saying, I appreciate, I'm so glad you, and hey, this is great. So you're speaking into the person's life in a way that is beneficial and effective, so that they're not sitting back wondering, hey, am I doing anything that's good? This is for every aspect of life. I give a very personal husband-wife connection, which is very valid and effective. Communication must happen. Encouragement must happen. But in all of life, you see this in whatever spectrum you're in. Boss-employee, employee-boss, child-parent, parent-child, neighbors, and all that. When we speak encouraging words to each other, what it does is it matures the relationship from being insecure, uncertain about each other, to being, hey, I have clarity. That's a good thing. We can go to the next level. When you don't speak into the other person, and when you just assume that they understand, guess what happens? You breed insecurity, and your relationship just stays plateaued right here. So encouragement takes it from just a plateau, a surface level, and takes it up a notch. Let me give you some examples of encouragement I find around here. I've seen this for years. I've been here for a few years, right? One of the times that just sits in my heart and mind is there's a person that was one of the founders of this church back in 1961. Her name was Mrs. Bailey. If you've been here a while, you know who Mrs. Bailey was, and she had passed away a few years ago. But Mrs. Bailey was awesome. Always smiled. Like, she spoke truth and such, but she always smiled. She was an encouragement. I remember one Sunday, it was during a season where we were going through some challenges, trying to figure out what type of music was acceptable for our congregation. And we were kind of going back and forth on some things, and some of it was heated and some of it wasn't, and it was just a challenging season for our church altogether. And there's one fellow that he was gifted with music, and I was in charge of the music program at the time, and I asked him to sing a special song. The words and the song were just tremendous. And he picked the song out himself, but the background music was a little bit on the edgy, more contemporary side than what most of the people cared for. And so there was a struggle there. What do you do with this? So after he got done, he was so excited. He got to serve the Lord and worship God in this way. He was thrilled for the song and communicating what God had done in his heart, just thrilled to pieces. So then the next question is, was it acceptable with people or not? With God it was. It was this act of worship before God. Listen, if David, go to the Old Testament, if David could dance before God totally naked and it was acceptable before God, then I would think that singing a worship song that totally brings praise to God would be acceptable, regardless of the background sounds that go alongside of it. But anyway, he goes at the end of the service, he's walking down the side, and he tells me about this. It was such a huge moment for him. He's just a young follower of Jesus. He had just started to follow Jesus a couple years maybe. And Mrs. Bailey comes up to him and says, "Oh, that song was tremendous. Thank you so much for singing that." We're friends, so he came up to me later, and he told me how much that meant to him. Kept him going. That little piece of encouragement, it just went a long way, and it spurred him on to, it was his first time singing in front of the people here at church, and he's like, man, I got to do that again. Put me on the schedule again. I want to do that. I want to keep worshiping God in this way. And it came back to one person giving tremendous encouragement. Now, just so you know about Mrs. Bailey, I'm not sure she liked this style of music. But that didn't matter, and she didn't even say anything about it. She loved the words and the heart of the person singing it. What a great testimony. Let me share a couple others. Every year, and I shared this in the earlier service, and I'll share it again today in this service. Every year, in early May, late April, early May, I get a phone call. And it's for the same purpose, same reason. And I got the same phone call about 3 weeks ago. Person called, it was Joyce. And so Joyce called, and she was in the early service. She knows what I'm about to say. And Joyce called, and she said, "Hey, Pastor Bill." I said, "Hey, Joyce, how you doing?" "Good. Hey, I want to talk to you about something." I said, "I know what you're about to talk to me about." And there was this like pause. She said, "What do you mean? How do you know what I'm about to talk to you about?" I said, "Because you talk to me about this every year, Joyce. I know what we're talking about." She goes, "Okay." A little bit confused. I said, "You're talking about Mother's Day." See, for Mother's Day, for several years, Joyce has wanted to be just to be a simple encouragement to moms. She understands as a mom that being a mom's not so easy all the time. And Mother's Day can be a very difficult day because you have expectations of, you're hoping that this one calls, you're hoping that this one shows up, you're hoping that the day goes well, you're just hoping for something nice for the day because it's the day that moms are honored, and you just want a nice day. And for some, you're struggling because you know that person is not going to call or show up, or you know it's going to be a fight at the end of the day, and you're just struggling with some things. Well, Joyce understands that, and so she takes it on herself. For years she's done this. She goes and she buys flowers, picks them out, buys the flowers, and she comes and hands them out to the ladies, to the moms, right? That's of her own desire. I never asked her to do any of that. She just wants to be a simple encouragement. So she calls and says, "Hey, just want to remind you, I know. Joyce, thank you. Keep being an encouragement. Moms need that, right? Moms, you with me?" Yeah, you need that encouragement and just simple little things and looking for ways to be an encouragement. And I appreciate Joyce doing that. Awesome. Let me give you another one. One of the hardest jobs in this church to do, and I've done this before, is to be the janitor at the church. For several years back, a while ago, I cleaned the church, and it's challenging because here's what happens. As you clean the church, and this happened to me before, I would be vacuuming through, and every week there were always a fingernail pile at a certain location because during church, for whatever reason, a person decided this was their time to clip their fingernails and leave them all over the ground. I don't know why. And if you're doing that right now, please stop. Okay? And if you hear a clipping, yeah, anyway. And then you'd go through and you'd have like trash here and like somebody has their coffee cup and then they just put it on the windowsill and they're thinking, I don't need to clean this up. Someone else will. And they leave piles of stuff and I'm probably the worst of it. But anyway, but other people do this. And you go to clean and it's like, oh man, I got to clean this up. Why can't, the trash can's 2 feet away. The Jimenez family comes every week and they clean the church. They clean the bathrooms, they vacuum the floors, they wipe things down, they sanitize, they do a great job every week. It's one of those thankless jobs. But I'm here to say thank you. I appreciate it. Sometimes we do some jobs that they just don't have encouragement behind it. It's discouraging. And you need encouragement to kind of propel you and to push you forward. And sometimes you go through seasons where maybe you keep it to yourself, but you go through seasons where you're just totally trashed internally because things aren't going so well. We all go through this. A couple of years ago, it was one of those seasons for me where I was just really going through a tough season in ministry and in life. And I didn't tell many people about it. There's a few people that I would share that with. But while I did, I got this really cool little card, little note sent to me. And the person had no idea I was going through a hard time. But what they sent meant so much. And I've gotten notes from many of you people. I've gotten texts and phone calls and notes and just encouragement verbally and stuff. And thank you. It means so much. But this one, and I keep all the cards. I have a pile of them. And why? Because when you have a rough day, it's great to pull out a card that helps you keep going, right? Here's what this one says. I won't tell you who wrote it. They're here, by the way. And they know, I think, that they wrote it. Or maybe they forgot. I don't know. But this is so cool. It says, Pastor Bill, in different churches I've attended, I've heard people discuss their pastor. Some say he's okay. Some are understanding. Some too tough. Maybe he thinks he knows it all. I guess you can't please us all. Well, let me look you over now. Number one, has 5 things. It's great. Number 1, you're a pretty nice guy. Number 2, you do listen to our problems. Number 3, you always encourage us. Number 4, you always spread God's word. Number 5, you always have time for us. And at the end says, hey, you know what? I guess you're a pretty good pastor. Keep up the good work. That meant so much to me. Because here's the thing, just like in anything, you give of yourself and you clean the church or you preach a message or you work in the kids program and there's crickets as to, when you scratch my back right there, did it feel good or not? Did you understand? Did you get it? Did it make a difference? Was it helpful? And sometimes there's not enough encouragement to kind of keep you going forward, to give you clarity. Am I making a difference in your life? And here's what I'm sharing with you. These things, these pieces of encouragement, they make a huge difference because what it does to a person, that it takes a lot of energy to pick up those fingernails. It takes a lot of energy to go and do this thing. It takes a lot out of you. It pushes you that much further to go beyond, to do an awesome job in a sense because you know you're making a difference. Healthy culture is right there. Instead of having a shame board over here and a high performance board over here, we should have, here's how I'm encouraging you throughout. And sometimes when people are going through rough seasons, you pick them up and you help them to keep on going. Now, here's the thing. I know in some of your minds, you have pushback going on. Yeah, but hold on, time out, Pastor. This is great and everything, but you said something nice about Joyce. What if Joyce gets a big head? You know, she thinks she's all that in a bag of chips. You ever think that, right? Like, I don't want them to get, and I've had people say that. I want you to get a big head or something, you know. Here's my response. I'd be more concerned about the person quitting or feeling like a failure because you didn't encourage them. I'd be way more concerned about it that way, especially today. In the past 2 years, the suicide rate, the drug overdose rate, anxiety and depression have gone up drastically, like a spike that everyone's beginning to talk about because the numbers are coming out from the last 2 years and they're saying this is way above expectations. What do we do? Now, there's a lot behind what we can do, but I have a great starting point. We get to be true followers of Jesus that do what Jesus did. And we get to encourage one another and to be able to kind of keep them in the game, if you will, and come up to them and say, hey, I so appreciate that song. I so appreciate the way you took care of this. I so appreciate this about, and I just want to encourage you, keep on going. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for this, that, and the other thing. It's going up to the person in the drive-thru, and instead of, hey, why you didn't do this just right, and it was too long, instead you're an encouragement. Hey, thanks so much for being here and giving me the food today. If you weren't here, I wouldn't have any food to get. Right? And it's going up to people all over, all around us, our neighbors, our friends, our spouse, our children, our parents, and to be able to find something, anything to be an encouragement to them for. That's what Jesus did. It's not that Jesus affirms all of the bad. By the way, does Jesus know more bad about us than we know about ourselves? Yeah, that's the amazing thing. And he continues to be an encouragement. Let me give you 3 examples of Jesus encouraging other people. You ready? The Samaritan woman. I mean, today, look, right now we're divided over everything, aren't we? And we need some encouragement. We're divided over politics. We're divided over race. We're divided over sexuality. We're divided over masks and vaccines and all this craziness over the last couple of years. And it's causing all kinds of stress. Jesus crosses over the racial divide, crosses over the gender divide, goes past both of those things to the Samaritan woman that was kind of a forbidden conversation, has a conversation with this woman, declares who he is to her. The encouragement that he was to her was at such a high level that she came to be a follower of Jesus, and I would suggest that she is the first missionary that's following Jesus as a result. Because here's what the Samaritan woman does. Racial divide, gender divide, all of that, Jesus throws out and says, hey, listen, I want to tell you who I am. Gives her that encouragement. She goes back to her town and says to her town, hey, listen, I found the Messiah. You got to come see him. Isn't that awesome? That started with simple encouragement. Jesus could have ignored her. Could have been like, okay, I'll just wait for her to go because she's not my kind of a people. But that's not who he is. He gives us that as a demonstration of how we should love people. Another one. The Pharisees bring this woman who's caught in adultery up to Jesus, and they bring her up and kind of throw her there and say, hey, it's time to stone her. Jesus, let's stone her. And Jesus says, you who have no sin can throw the first stone. And all of the people around that were excited to get Jesus on board and make him part of the team and include him on the wrong side, if you will, drop the stones and leave. And he looks at her and says this amazing statement, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. Do you see the encouragement? The encouragement to this person that she knows she blew it. She's in public saying, oh man, I totally messed up. And I would just suggest that probably the Pharisees, and they tricked her into this anyway, and there's a whole messed up thing probably happening in the background. However, here she is, a total shame in society. And Jesus looks and says, I'm going to protect you from them villainizing you. And I want to correct you so that you can live a life that's correct. It starts with grace. I love what Paul does in Romans chapter 7 and chapter 8. Tremendous theology. As Paul writes and says, you know, things I want to do, I keep messing up. I want to say the right thing. I want to do the right thing. I keep messing up and doing it. And he says at the end of chapter 7, oh, wretched man that I am, who will save me from this? Like this total body is a messed up thing, and I just feel so awful about myself. And then chapter 8, verse 1, he says this, there is therefore now no condemnation to those that are in Christ. Here's what Jesus does. He burns the shame card and says, I don't condemn you. Follow me. He offers encouragement to those that have blown it the most. And probably the one that's nearest and dearest to our heart is the next one, Peter. Peter at the time of Jesus' crucifixion, we've talked about this even recently, where Peter goes and he's denying Jesus 3 times. First conversation that Jesus has with Peter there as they're kind of going through this, he doesn't leave it not talked about. He encourages him. It's Peter, I know you repeatedly messed up. Like, you didn't just mess up once. It wasn't an oops. You intentionally went against me. You denied me 3 times. He doesn't bring that up to hurt him. He comes to Peter and he says, hey, Peter, buddy, you love me? Peter's like, Lord, I'm a loser. You shouldn't even be talking to me. I denied you. I left following you. I'm back on a boat. I'm trying to get my shipping or sailing or fishing business, whatever it is, back up and running. And Jesus says, I know, you failed. You love me? Feed my sheep. He does it 3 times. Why? He takes someone that totally blew it and encourages them to get back up. You see, we need to be others focused like Jesus. We need to put the missing piece of the relationship back into play and encourage one another the way Jesus did. That instead of, oh, you failed too many times, you're done, I've had it with you, or you're not the right person to be around, or whatever it might be, he instead encourages them. It's not that he never speaks the truth into their life, he does, but it's at the appropriate time after he's pouring grace and encouragement into them, then there's opportunity to speak and say, hey, listen, let me help you go forward now. So this week, I'm encouraging you, here's the habits, number 4. I'm encouraging you to practice this. We need to encourage one another. Not just here, but at home, at work. I believe that the church is here intentionally you guys are here intentionally at this season of society and life, history, for the purpose of doing exactly this. I believe the biggest difference we can make currently is to be an encouragement. The biggest difference is to start with being an encouragement. That we look at other people, we understand where they are, because the greatest degree of encouragement is found when we understand where they are and we speak into their heart and help them to go forward. I believe we can make a bigger difference if we start here than anything. Start with your spouse, your child, parent, friend. What can you say that's encouraging? What can you do that's encouraging? And maybe you won't see a difference immediately, but maybe it'll take a few weeks, months, years of encouraging them consistently to help them acknowledge and hear the love that you're offering to them. So take the card, and first side is who. Who are you going to encourage? You have Monday through Friday, 5 days. I'm giving you Saturday and Sunday off. You don't have to encourage anybody on Saturday and Sunday next week, okay? Just saying, making life easy. There's sarcasm in that, if you didn't get that. But I want you to be deliberate Monday through Friday. Here's our assignment. This should be part of our habits of what we do, so we're thinking about it. And I know for some of you, you're like, I don't encourage anybody. I would like them to encourage me. And I'd say, I get that, but you need to turn the corner here and do as Jesus would have you to do and be an encouragement to others where you can currently. Don't flatter them. Encourage. So who and what for? Who and what for? So figure out Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And maybe it's going to be like just in that moment, oh man, I was here, I recognized they needed to be encouraged, and I said something kind to them. Very simple. It could be the simplest of things, but build this as a habit into our life. And as you do, here's what's going to happen. The negativity begins to dissipate. And we begin to grow and mature our relationships much better. Next week, I want to talk about getting rid of negative Nelly. And I don't know about you, but there's some negative Nellies around here that we need to get rid of in our own hearts, by the way, not the people next to you. Don't nudge. But we're going to talk about that a little bit next week and getting rid of the negative Nelly. So I want to give you that opportunity. Practice this as a healthy habit and be an encouragement to people around you, not the people that are just the easiest to be an encouragement to, but to people that are a struggle to be an encouragement to.